Hey guys, I'm Sam Petro, the Drug Prevention Program Specialist here at Adult and Teen Challenge of the Midlands, Omaha. So I get to do two things. I work with the men that are currently in the program here in this house, mentoring them. And then the other thing we do is I help guys get ready to share their stories, and we go into high schools and junior highs, share our stories, our personal stories of addiction as a way to reinforce the drug prevention curriculum that high schools and middle schools have. So I love doing both those things for Adult and Teen Challenge. I've been on staff for going on about 3 years. It will be this year. So originally, though, I actually went through the program as a student in 2014. But to back up, how did I even get there? I grew up actually in a really great Christian home. My dad was a pastor, and we had a really great childhood. I just remember things being really easy and simple. There was no crazy traumatic events that happened in our life as I was growing up. And we lived in a small town, so it was really fun to kind of run around, have free reign of the town. And addiction wasn't even on my radar. I mean, I think back then I thought that it only happened to a certain type of person from a certain type of neighborhood. And I just had no worries in the world with that type of thing. My parents didn't drink or smoke, so I figured I would have been set up for success with that kind of a thing. But as life went on for me, junior high and high school, there was mounting pressure in my life. I felt like I needed to be perfect, and it got worse to a point where if I wasn't perfect, that I felt worthless. And so that pressure just kept building and building. I had good grades to start in high school, but as they started to slip, I remember my family kind of panicked, and they actually transferred me to a different school, thinking maybe that would help whatever was going on. Meanwhile, I made all new friends, and during that transition, I kind of got fed up with all of that pressure and made a decision that I was really going to just buck the system and head in the opposite direction of whatever my parents wanted for me. And began saying, hey, I'm gonna figure things out and do it my own way on my own terms at this point. And I had no idea what my own way was, so it really led me into some experimentation. At first it was just smoking cigarettes and starting to hang out with an older crowd and doing some of the things that they did. I remember going to my first party in high school where there was alcohol. I'd been invited to parties in the past, but it always said no. When I showed up this time, people were like, wow, like you're here, that's so cool. And I enjoyed the alcohol, and I enjoyed the whole party atmosphere. And so the crazy thing was nothing bad happened at this point as I was experimenting with these things. I had heard horror stories in the past, but none of it was coming to hit me like that. There was no car accidents. I wasn't getting in trouble with the police. My teeth weren't falling out from smoking. And so I also got this thought in my head that everything that everybody had said about those types of things probably wasn't true at all. And that stayed with me throughout a time when I went away to college and then failed out almost immediately, feeling much like a failure all over again, that those feelings of feeling worthless all over again. And I was really, I think, set up at that point to begin experimenting with the drugs. Didn't happen right away. I actually found a really great job first and began to have some success in the working world and enjoyed some promotions and making money. But then I do remember the day that I got high for the first time. We were cleaning up my friend's yard, and his parents were gone. It was the day after 4th of July, so there was quite a bit of fireworks to clean up, when he brought a pipe out to share and to smoke. And I told him, hey man, I don't smoke weed. I'm not interested right away. When he explained that it wasn't weed, it was this new thing called K2. Some of you guys might know it as spice, but it was perfectly legal at the time. I was told it was totally harmless. You could just buy it at the store, basically. And I was like, hey, it's not an illegal drug, so I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot. When I did, I got high. I got really high, and something for me changed right there in that moment. I remember thinking, wow, I could do this. This could be a new hobby for me. And I actually went out that day and bought everything necessary to basically get high as often as I wanted. And the deal was, as long as I continued to do well at work, get promotions, show up to work, whatever, I could really get high as much as I wanted. And that turned into an everyday thing really quickly. But it didn't stop with K2. I began experimenting with other drugs too. It wasn't long before I was smoking weed. And then on the weekends, with friends going to parties, we would find maybe a different new drug to try out that weekend. And I began experimenting with different party drugs and some harder drugs, some things that I never thought I would have done. I began to get really comfortable, honestly, with trying new things. Just that same pervasive thought of, well, nothing bad is happening. Everything everybody has always said about these things must not be really true, because it's not getting me in trouble. I'm doing great in life. I'm totally fine. Of course, I kept digging a deeper hole. In addiction, I did get to a point where it began to be a problem with work. It began to be a problem with my family and with my finances. And I wanted to stop, but then I couldn't. I wanted to stop, but I really kept doing all of those same things. And there started to be a cycle in my life where I began to get in trouble at work and put on these attendance warnings. And then I got to a point where I knew that I needed to stop, and I still couldn't. At this time, I got treatment for the first time. I did an intensive outpatient treatment program, really trying to save my job, go through this intensive outpatient treatment program at the same time. And I did okay for a little while. I think I was clean and sober for the first time in a long time, for about 8 months. But then life happened again, and I had not really dealt with any of the underlying issues of my addiction in the first place. And it was really easy to pick right back up where I had left. And that was how I had dealt with life for so long at that point, that I really went full bore right back into my addiction for a couple of months. And then I would clean up and get my life back together. And I'd do okay, and my family would be happy for me or whatever. Something would happen, and I would really relapse and go right back to where I was. This went on for 2 or 3 years of doing okay for a little while and then doing really poorly for a little while. It was like these 2-month or 3-month on and off cycles, and it got really old and really unhealthy for me. It finally caught up to me when I did catch a couple of charges with the police, and I'm so glad I did. I remember actually waking up in an ambulance, and they were trying to put an IV in my hand, and I jerked awake, and I was handcuffed to the gurney. And that was the first time I remember having a conversation with a police officer about my drug abuse and my drug addiction. And later on, being released from the hospital, I actually went back out and did the same thing. Got high again, and then I got caught again by the police. And I think I really needed that to take some things seriously. At this point, I had court. I had some charges that were going to follow me no matter what. And I knew it was time to do something drastic. And that was when I finally went for it. My parents had been talking to me about Adult and Teen Challenge for a long time, but now I wanted it, and I needed it, but I wanted it, and I was ready. And I made the call and began the application process, and I just knew that this is what God would have for me. I knew that there was more for me than the life that I was living, and I was ready to see what that was going to look like. So Adult and Teen Challenge gave me a place to come and honestly just let the fog of my mind clear out and allow sobriety to just happen in a much more permanent way than it ever had before. But also the time and the place to deal with those underlying issues that had always come back to bite me. Some of those feelings of worthlessness and feeling like a failure, some things about my identity, some things I believed about who I was that really always brought me back down, had to be addressed. And it happened at a place like Adult and Teen Challenge. That's where really the Lord, Jesus would speak straight into those areas of my life and my identity. And I walked away from Adult and Teen Challenge having really understanding what it meant to be a new creation and having a new identity and knowing what my worth and value was. And things have never been the same since. After leaving Adult and Teen Challenge for a year, I went back to college for a year and then was invited to come back on a staff. And I've been so grateful to come back now after my whole story, and my story is still playing out, but to know that I get to be a part of these other guys' stories as they're experiencing what I experienced and getting a new identity in Christ dealing with these underlying issues, having freedom and peace in their lives for the first time maybe ever is really cool, and I'm really privileged to be a part of this ministry today.